Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Happy Friday. We have a little bit of a light morning ahead of us. We are going to talk about pass-through entities with Representative Harrison. And then we have two other bill introductions after the floor, and then we will be ready to attend our tax workshop in the House chamber. So grateful to have you here with us, Representative Harrison, and love to hear about your bill. It's up on our committee page for everyone.
Morning, Madam Chair and members of the Ways and Means Committee. Thank you for giving me a few minutes to talk with you this morning. H61, as was referred, is an act relating to elective pass-through entity income tax and credit. What does that all mean? SALT, as it commonly referred to, is the acronym for state and local tax deductions. Before 2018, there was no limit to the deduction on your federal tax return. However, under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, it was capped at $10,000 for those filing jointly and $5,000 for those filing individually. I think we probably all remember that change and the impact it might have had on us individually or certainly, but the standard deduction was changed. So maybe most of us were held harmless on that. This bill is meant to create a structure which pass-through entities such as sole proprietors, partnerships, LLCs, or S-corps claim a federal deduction for state and local taxes paid in the same manner that now 29 other states have done. The federal, state, and local tax allows taxpayers to reduce their tax liability by deducting the taxes they paid at the state level. In 2020, the IRS approved this workaround. I think Connecticut was the first state to do it, involving the pass-through entity tax. So this is sanctioned by the federal government, even though it reduces the revenue of the federal government by allowing this. Under the criteria from the IRS, the state creates an elective pass-through entity tax at the entity level that allows the entity to claim and use the federal SALT reduction. A corresponding credit is then passed through to its members. The credit in many states is typically around 90% of the elective pass-through entity tax, thus creating some additional revenue for the state while keeping dollars local. JFO did an estimate on this last year. I followed up with them earlier in the session, and they currently estimate that the impacted business owners would save somewhere between 10 and 20 million collectively annually. The tax department further estimates, because it's not at 100%, further estimates it would have a positive impact on Vermont revenues somewhere in the neighborhood of $500,000. So it's not, when we're talking billions, it's not a huge item in terms of the state, but it's a positive, not a negative. And that's, I think, important to understand. H61, as introduced, is essentially what the Senate passed last year in their version of the Economic and Workforce Development Bill. I think it was contained in S11. And I expect that while there were some discussions on it, because it was not in the House version, it came late in the session, and perhaps the time did not allow to really fully vet the issue. So as a consequence, it was ultimately taken out of S11 and we did not pass it. Couple just really quick examples, which I didn't realize before, but if Vermont has this pass-through entity provision, if you're a Vermont resident and you have a business in New York has a pass-through entity as well. You could take advantage of this. if Vermont, which we don't today, if you're a Vermont resident and you own that same business in New York, even though New York has this provision, you can't take advantage of it. New York resident could, but not a Vermont resident. So in a way, we're encouraging someone who owns out-of-state businesses to live in one of those states that use it because they will be better off financially because of it. As I said, 29 states do it, and that includes our neighbors like Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New York. So it's widespread. And as I said, when I looked in this earlier, it was 28 states. I don't remember who the 29th is. And my understanding is the tax department can certainly address this better. There may be 20,000 filers in Vermont that this could potentially apply to. So it doesn't apply to a regular corporation. It would be a pass-through corporation, which, as I said, could be a partnership, sole proprietorship, limited liability, S corp type thing. So I hope that helps. I will be the first to admit that I don't know I'm not a tax accountant or a tax lawyer. I think it's an interesting concept, and obviously a lot of other states that were impacted by that $10,000 cap on deductions have found ways to work around it, which are now sanctioned by the IRS. It's interesting. Initially, when Congress passed that deduction limit, some states tried to create, we'll just call those state and local taxes a charitable deduction. And that didn't fly with the IRS. But now they have come up with a program which the IRS says is perfectly legit and given guidance on it. So for the mechanics and the details, if I'm allowed, I would defer to the tax department. I would defer to Ms. Shepard and the Ledge Counsel as to and JFO. Emily is the new person that does revenue, and I've talked to her and one of her colleagues as well.
And Graham has a pretty comprehensive memo about this idea from last session that we can find for anyone who's looking for it.
Abby has actually put together a PowerPoint last session.
Mm-hmm. And next week, because today's Friday, next week we're going to do a pretty comprehensive conversation around pass-through entities in general, not this topic in specific, but just
no, it's
corporate. You're welcome to watch that if you want to catch up on
structures. Can be very difficult to understand because over the years we've created a number of different types, but that's what keeps certain people employed and busy. So, but I'm intrigued by the idea, especially because it doesn't cost the state any revenue and might have a small positive gain. And anything we can do to encourage people, one, to stay here and contribute to our economy, to me is potential for positive. So anyhow, I'll leave it at that. I appreciate you giving me a few minutes this morning to kind of give you a really high level overview.
It's an interesting philosophical question about where our response, I think we all read in the paper about the challenges of the IRS and the federal government to retain the tax revenues that they need to, and how many different ways there are to sort of legally evade that responsibility.
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting philosophical question to see what is our responsibility as a state to support the feds in that revenue.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that. However, the much bigger states around us have all done this. So whether we do it or not is not even moving the needle. So,
Representative Anthony, did you have your hand up and then?
Only an observation, Madam Chair. Unfortunately, there's no workaround for individuals. And at the time, it was widely viewed as a sort of falls on the shoulders of those states who have a local income or a state income tax, which I don't want to go down the political route, but it seemed, to be divisive. Let me put it that way.
yeah.
And I think it's terribly unfortunate. I'm astonished that the IRS could find a workaround, defy Congress for some people, but not others.
I think actually Connecticut may have done this on their own in 2019. And obviously it raised a question with the IRS, and the IRS figured out a way that was okay and issued a bulletin that, you can do it. This was after the charitable deduction role. But, in response to your cabinet, I'm not going to get into political conversations of what went on in Congress back when 2017 when this was passed. But most individuals, I suspect, were held harmless or actually benefited because of the offsetting increase in the standard deduction. So that helps soften it. The other thing that's important to, understand, and who knows, we routinely put sunsets on things. I think this provision might go away in sometime later in the 20s. I don't know if it was a 10-year window or what. Oftentimes those sunsets are removed. I mean, no different than here. We do certain things. We put a sunset because we want to review it and look at it and see if we still like it in 5 years. So, it could be that 5 years from now it goes away, in which case this would go away.
Do you know if there's a maximum deduction that can be taken?
Don't know. That was a detailed question, Madam Chair.
It was a detailed question that just occurred to me though, and I thought.
Yeah, and I don't, quite honestly, I don't know if you could put a maximum. Maybe you can, but again, that would be a question for our tax experts.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Jan.
See you again soon.
It was a pleasant, I'm headed back to committee. I told them I was coming over to introduce a bill, and I'm sure they'll love it, and we'll pass it right out. So expect to see it on the calendar
That you
Tuesday.
succeeded.
Yeah, all right. Thank you.
Thank you, take
All right,
care.
have a good day.
Thank you.
We will be back here after the floor for two more bill introductions.